The galaxy had known war for as long as its civilizations had existed. The Tsar Consortium, with its massive war fleets, had crushed every opponent that dared challenge its borders. The Eldar Dominion, elegant and deadly, had mastered quantum manipulation and spread its influence across hundreds of star systems. The Vantari Collective, a federation of technocratic warlords, had devised weapons of unimaginable power, their war machines capable of dismantling entire planets. The galaxy had seen everything. Every possible strategy, every weapon, every form of destruction that could be conjured. There was no power greater than the combined might of these dominant factions. But everything changed the day the unknown ship appeared. At first, it seemed like an anomaly, just another glitch in the endless data streams that made up the galaxy's long-range sensor network. No one had reason to pay attention. The sector in question was a forgotten corner of space, where uninhabited planets and barren moons floated in isolation. No one visited this region of space unless it was by accident. That was until the outpost on the fringe of the Beta Quadrant first noticed the blip on its radar. It was faint, distant, and irregular. Nothing to be concerned about. Commander Krell Zarnok, an experienced officer who had overseen the quiet sector for years, initially dismissed it as a sensor malfunction. But as the hours passed, the blip grew stronger, clearer. It was moving steadily toward their station, cutting through the black void with unnerving precision. The station's crew scrambled to confirm the signal, but their systems were unresponsive. The ship was unlike anything they had ever encountered. It didn't make any sense. It was too large to be a scout ship, but too silent to be any kind of typical warship. It was too dark, too unnatural. They could see it now through the station's external viewports. A massive, almost monolithic structure, its surface gleaming with an iridescent mirror-like sheen, reflecting the light of distant stars in an eerie, unnatural way. The ship's sheer size was impossible to ignore. It dwarfed anything in the fleets of the galactic powers. It seemed to devour space itself, as if it existed not just in the physical realm, but in the very fabric of reality. Commander Zarnok's hands trembled as he issued orders to prepare for a potential encounter, but deep inside he felt something far worse than fear. He felt a premonition, a sense that something far beyond his comprehension was drawing near. The ship drew closer. The crew's initial shock turned to panic as the unknown vessel slowed its approach and came to a halt mere kilometers from the station. All sensors went dead. No data could be collected. No readings were transmitted. The station was utterly blind, trapped in the quiet silence of the unknown. Then came the message. The first message. A voice, sharp and cold, crackled over the comms. Attention, all ships and stations in this sector. We are humanity's battleship. We come in peace, but we are prepared for war. Do not attempt to resist. The message was simple, clear, and to the point. But the coldness of it, the unyielding, emotionless tone, struck terror into every soul aboard the station. Humanity? No one had ever heard of such a race, and yet here they were, in a ship that seemed as though it had been forged by some ancient, forgotten force. The galaxy, with all its vast knowledge and proud empires, had no answer. And now the unknown had arrived, and its presence was impossible to ignore. The galaxy had never experienced true fear until now. The first battle erupted within hours of humanity's arrival, and the galaxy was ill-prepared for what followed. It was the Eldar Dominion that first took up the challenge, their fleets renowned for their speed and grace, their ships equipped with technology that allowed them to manipulate the fabric of space itself. The Dominion's pride, their advanced weaponry, and their unmatched tactical brilliance had given them the belief that no force could stand against them. Until now. When the massive black battleship of humanity came into view, the Eldar fleet immediately scrambled to launch a coordinated assault. The commanders had not wasted time studying the mysterious ship. They had underestimated it from the very beginning. Surely, they thought, the humans were just another faction with advanced technology that could be defeated with the right strategy. They had never encountered a ship of such size and power, but their arrogance blinded them to the obvious threat. The Eldar fleet engaged quickly, surrounding the humanity battleship with their sleek, fast-moving vessels. Their weapons, capable of tearing through shields and armor with pinpoint precision, lashed out in a devastating barrage. Their ships danced across the void, weaving in and out of the space around the battleship, making themselves difficult targets. The first strike hit with devastating accuracy. The Eldar fleet leader, Commander Zenthis, watched in disbelief as the blast, intended to cripple the human ship's engines, bounced harmlessly off its dark hull. The impact rippled across the ship like a stone skipping across a still pond, leaving no trace of damage. Before the Eldar could regroup or attempt a different strategy, the humanity battleship responded. A beam of energy, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, surged from the ship's center. The beam cut through space like a knife, striking the lead Eldar cruiser with a force so overwhelming that it tore through the vessel in an instant. The cruiser split apart, debris scattered in every direction, its shattered remains drifting lifelessly through the cold expanse of space. The fleet commanders watched in stunned silence as the destruction unfolded before them. The Eldar ships attempted to maneuver to escape the impending devastation, but they were too slow. The battleship fired again, and another cruiser vanished in an explosion of light and twisted metal. No shields, no evasive maneuvers, nothing could protect them from the immense power unleashed by humanity's ship. Panic spread through the fleet as they scrambled to break off the attack, but the battleship moved with deadly precision. It was not a ship designed to flee. It was built to hunt. With each blast, another Eldar vessel was reduced to debris, and what remained of their once proud fleet quickly dissolved into disarray. Zenthis, realizing the hopelessness of their position, attempted to rally what was left of his fleet for a tactical retreat, but it was already too late. Humanity's ship didn't wait for them to fall back. It was relentless. The remaining Eldar ships were caught in a vice-like grip, and one by one, they were annihilated with terrifying efficiency. The few survivors would speak of the battle for years to come, but their voices would carry nothing but the whispers of fear and disbelief. The Eldar had lost, utterly, completely, and the galaxy's first exposure to humanity's might was an undeniable demonstration of just how far their power stretched. There was no room for negotiation, no mercy to be given. Humanity had made its message clear. Resistance was futile. In the aftermath, the Dominion's pride had been shattered, their confidence broken. The rest of the galaxy, watching from afar, understood one thing. Humanity was not a power to be trifled with. No one knew who they were, or where they had come from, but they knew one thing for certain. The galaxy had just been introduced to something far worse than mere conquest. It had been introduced to fear. The word spread quickly across the galaxy, a ripple of terror that traveled faster than the light itself. It wasn't just the loss of Eldar ships or the destruction of their fleet that sent shockwaves through the galaxy. It was the sheer, overwhelming power of humanity's battleship. The way it moved, the way it struck, the way it tore through everything in its path without hesitation or mercy. This was no ordinary military force. It was something else entirely. The galaxy's greatest powers, those who had ruled with indomitable strength for millennia, now realized they were not the apex of the universe. They were fragile, weak in the face of an unknown enemy. It didn't take long for the other galactic factions to respond. The Vantari Collective, always eager to defend their technological supremacy, immediately sent their fleets to the front lines. Their leaders, the technocrats who prided themselves on innovation and firepower, were quick to assume that humanity's ships, while powerful, could be countered with the right strategy. They had never encountered a force that wasn't at least partially within their grasp. Until now, if anyone could overcome the human threat, it would be the Vantari. They would rely on their superior numbers, their advanced weapons, and their brilliant minds to find a weakness. But they didn't have the time to prepare. As soon as the first Vantari fleet arrived in the sector, they were greeted by the same sight that had struck the Eldar Dominion, the black, imposing shape of humanity's battleship. At first, the Vantari commanders were hesitant, unsure whether they had encountered a remnant of some long-forgotten empire or a group of new, ambitious conquerors. They made the mistake of assuming the latter. The idea of negotiating with a race that had shown no sign of fear or uncertainty was something they couldn't comprehend. They were wrong. The Vantari fleet moved in formation, a mass of ships equipped with energy-based weapons, precision-guided missiles, and shields capable of absorbing incredible amounts of damage. The fleet commanders were confident that with their strength in numbers and superior tactics, they could overwhelm the enemy. The humans, they thought, would be like any other force they had crushed before, vulnerable to clever maneuvering and superior firepower. The battle began with a barrage of missiles. The Vantari fired as one, their weapons lighting up the void with blinding intensity. The humanity ship did not move. It did not retreat or attempt to evade. Instead, the missiles struck its dark hull and simply disappeared, absorbed by the ship as if they were never there. The sheer power of their weapons seemed to do nothing. Before the Vantari could react, humanity's battleship fired back. A beam of energy shot forward from its heart, a concentrated pulse that sliced through the void with terrifying precision. It struck the lead Vantari dreadnought, and in an instant, the entire ship exploded in a blinding flash. The Vantari, who had prided themselves on their indestructible vessels, now watched as one of their strongest ships was reduced to nothing. The fleet hesitated, trying to regroup, but humanity's ship was relentless. A second shot, even more powerful than the first, tore through a battleship and sent its remains floating in space. The Vantari commanders realized they were not fighting a traditional force. They were fighting something that had transcended conventional warfare. There was no strategy they could employ to survive this encounter. The battle continued, but it was one-sided. Each time the Vantari attempted to fight back, humanity's battleship responded with overwhelming force. Ships disappeared into space. Entire sections of the fleet disintegrated in moments, and soon, panic began to take hold. The few remaining Vantari ships tried to escape, but there was no safe place in the void when humanity's battleship was nearby. In the end, the Vantari fleet was shattered. Their best ships were gone, and their forces were in full retreat, their surviving vessels scattered and broken. The galaxy's greatest technological minds, those who had prided themselves on their inventions, were left with nothing but the bitter taste of defeat. The Vantari collective had learned a lesson the hard way. They were no longer the dominant force in the galaxy. But even in their retreat, the Vantari were not alone in their fear. The Tsar Consortium, watching from afar, had already begun to react. The message was clear. This was no isolated incident. Humanity was not just a threat to one empire. It was a threat to all. The galaxy, which had once been divided by petty squabbles and endless wars, now found itself united by something far more profound: fear. And that fear only grew as the human ship continued its unstoppable advance, moving through the galaxy with purpose, leaving nothing in its wake but devastation. The question that lingered in every corner of the galaxy was the same: who were these humans, and what did they want? The galaxy was in chaos, and no one knew how to stop the unstoppable. The Eldar, once proud and unshakable, had been torn apart by humanity's battleship. The Vantari, with all their technological prowess, had been reduced to fleeing remnants. Yet, despite their overwhelming power, humanity's message remained cryptic and unsettling. There were no demands, no ultimatums, only the quiet, cold declaration that humanity had arrived, and they were here to stay. As the destruction spread, the Zark Consortium, known for their cold calculation and vast resources, realized that their traditional methods of dealing with threats wouldn't work against this new force. For generations, the Zark had been the undisputed military power in the galaxy, their fleets the largest and most efficient. When a potential enemy threatened, they sent a fleet, deployed their forces, and won. The galaxy had bent to their will time and time again. But now, a new and terrifying unknown had appeared, and it moved with a purpose they couldn't understand. Zark military strategists and generals convened in secret, pooling their vast intelligence resources, seeking any information about the humans and their mysterious warship. But there were no records, no references, no traces of humanity in any of the known archives. The entire species seemed to have materialized from thin air. It was as if they had been hiding, waiting in the shadows of space, and now they had emerged with a strength that defied all understanding. In the wake of the failed Eldar and Vantari campaigns, the Tark sent envoys to other empires, calling for an unprecedented alliance. For the first time in recorded history, the great galactic powers set aside their differences. The Tark, Eldar, and Vantari knew that this was not a war of conventional means. Their technology, advanced though it was, had proven useless against the might of the humanity ship. They could not rely on their usual tactics, their usual weapons. They needed something else, something that could stand against the sheer, relentless force that had obliterated entire fleets. The alliance forged between the three empires was a fragile one, driven by desperation rather than trust. But it didn't matter. They could not afford failure, not when the threat loomed so large. The galaxy's most formidable military minds put aside centuries of enmity and devised a strategy. They pooled their resources, their knowledge, and their might. They would amass a fleet large enough to surround and, with their combined firepower, finally overwhelm the humans. No single fleet had been able to stand against them. Perhaps this would be the key. For months, the galaxy's great powers worked tirelessly to prepare, assembling an armada that spanned entire star systems. The fleet grew in size and strength, and the rumors began to spread. Word of the alliance reached every corner of the galaxy, from the smallest outposts to the grandest capitals. Every species and faction, regardless of their loyalties, understood the stakes. They watched as the alliance's forces gathered, hoping for a victory they had not yet dared dream of. As the final components of the fleet were put into place, tensions were high. The combined forces of the Zark, Eldar, and Vantari were ready. They would confront humanity head-on, end the threat, and reassert their dominance. There was no other choice. It was now or never. The battle took place in the heart of the galaxy, far from any known civilization. A barren sector where the two sides could meet without risking civilian casualties. The Alliance's fleet, a vast ocean of ships, moved into position, ready to launch a coordinated attack that would leave humanity's battleship with no way to escape. As the first wave of attacks began, the galaxy held its breath. The fleet unleashed a barrage of missiles and energy blasts so intense that it seemed to shake the very fabric of space. For the first time, it seemed as though humanity might finally be outmatched. The black ship was battered from all sides, hit by wave after wave of fire, and yet it held steady, like a mountain against the relentless tide of destruction. The humans did not retreat, nor did they falter. The black ship's weapons, now fully charged, unleashed an unholy fury in return. A single shot from its center sliced through the heart of the Zark flagship, turning it into an expanding cloud of vaporized metal. A second shot obliterated an Eldar cruiser, leaving no trace behind. The combined fleets watched in stunned silence as their best ships were simply erased, as though they had never existed at all. Panic rippled through the Alliance. There was no strategy that could account for this kind of power. There was no defense that could hold. The combined might of the galaxy's greatest military minds, their greatest resources, were crumbling before them. The leaders of the Zark, Eldar, and Vantari had underestimated the humans, thinking that sheer numbers and technology could win the day. They were wrong. Humanity's battleship, with its relentless power and implacable will, seemed unstoppable. And as the last of the Alliance's forces fell apart, fleeing into the far reaches of the galaxy, the message was clear. Humanity had proven that it was not just a force to be reckoned with. It was a force to fear. The galaxy would never be the same again. In the aftermath of the catastrophic defeat, the galaxy's once proud powers reeled in the wake of their shattered fleets. The surviving leaders were left to contend with the uncomfortable truth. Humanity was not just a passing storm on the horizon, but a force that had permanently altered the balance of power in the galaxy. The great empires, once confident in their technological supremacy and military prowess, now found themselves at the mercy of something they couldn't understand and couldn't stop. The alliance that had been formed out of necessity had dissolved as quickly as it had come together, each faction retreating to their strongholds, licking their wounds, and pondering the impossible question: what now? On the homeworlds of the Tzark, Eldar, and Vantari, the halls of power were filled with urgent discussions and frantic calculations. The galaxy's military minds, those who had once been untouchable, revered for their ability to foresee and control any conflict, were now grappling with their own helplessness. None of their strategies, no matter how refined, had worked. They had thrown their most formidable fleets against humanity's battleship, only to watch them disintegrate in the blink of an eye. The sheer force that the humans wielded was beyond anything the galaxy's greatest strategists had anticipated. They had no way to counter it. But the leaders of these empires, though shaken, were not quick to give up. The notion of surrender was foreign to them, an affront to their very identity as dominant galactic powers. They might not have the firepower to challenge humanity directly, but they had something else: political influence, resources, and the vast networks of spies, diplomats, and covert operations that spanned the galaxy. If there was one thing they knew how to do, it was manipulate the currents of galactic politics. They made their first move quickly. They sent emissaries to every corner of the galaxy, seeking allies. Fear was a powerful motivator, and it didn't take long for the smaller factions to fall in line. The lesser powers, those who had been crushed or ignored by the great empires, saw an opportunity to turn the tide. They too were afraid, but the prospect of working with the mighty powers of the galaxy presented them with a chance for survival, and possibly even advancement. They would unite. They would resist. The war against humanity would continue, and this time they would be ready. But even as the negotiations began, the humans made their own move. In a quiet, unspoken gesture, they began to deploy their warship to the heart of the galaxy. It was a presence, not an invasion. A calculated display of power that left the galaxy's great powers unsettled. Humanity's battleship didn't fire upon any new targets. It didn't threaten or engage in active combat. It simply arrived and positioned itself above the strategic centers of power, hovering as a reminder that it had no need for alliances or negotiations. It was enough for the galaxy's rulers to know that it was watching. The sheer weight of its presence was enough to paralyze them. For the first time in history, the once glorious empires of the galaxy were united not by mutual interest or ambition, but by terror. The leaders of the Tzark, Eldar, and Vantari, once confident in their superiority, now found themselves whispering in secret chambers, debating how to proceed. They had no answers. They could not fight the humans with brute force. They could not outmaneuver them with strategy, and so they turned to the only option left. They began to negotiate. It was not a peace treaty, not yet, but the emissaries that were sent to humanity were not filled with demands or threats. They were filled with humble requests, questions laced with fear. The galaxy's leaders needed to know one thing. What did humanity want? The message that came in return was brief but chilling. We are humanity. We seek nothing from you except one thing, compliance. It was a declaration, not a negotiation. A final word from the humans who had come to show the galaxy just how fragile its empires were. The message echoed throughout the political arenas of every major power, and in its wake, a quiet panic took root. Humanity had not come for conquest in the traditional sense. They had no need to crush the galaxy's civilizations for their resources, their territories, or their wealth. They had no interest in ruling or expanding their empire. They had come instead to make a statement. They were the new order. They were a force that would brook no resistance. And for the first time, the galaxy's great powers understood that they were not in charge. They never had been. The galaxy, with all its wars and rivalries, had been given a lesson in humility. Humanity's presence was not something to be feared just for its military might, but for what it represented. A species that had no need for alliances, no need for territory, no need for riches. Humanity had arrived as a reminder that in the vast expanse of the stars, there were forces beyond the comprehension of even the greatest empires, and the galaxy would never forget the meaning of that fear. In the wake of humanity's terse, chilling response, the galaxy was plunged into a tense, uneasy silence. The once unshakable confidence of the major empires had fractured, leaving only a quiet, simmering fear that rippled across every star system. The great powers, now fully aware of the nature of their adversary, huddled behind their borders, engaging in secretive discussions that were never meant to leave the walls of their war rooms. They had all faced enemies in the past, but never something like this. Humanity wasn't interested in domination through force alone. Their very presence commanded obedience without uttering a single threat. The galaxy's leaders could only speculate about what their true intentions might be. But one thing was certain. The old ways of war, of power plays and negotiations, had been irrevocably shattered. The rule of pride and negotiations had been irrevocably shattered. The Tsar Consortium, in a rare moment of unity, convened with the remaining Eldar and Vantari leaders. The humans, their terrible warship now stationed in the heart of the galaxy, had not demanded resources, nor had they come with armies bent on invasion. Instead, they had come with an air of finality, like a god surveying a world unworthy of its gaze. Every plan, every weapon, every stratagem the galaxy had used to settle conflict now felt insufficient, obsolete. Humanity, as incomprehensible as they were, had somehow broken the rules. Months passed in agonizing indecision, but the fear never lifted. Systems fell into a state of uneasy coexistence with their new overlords, but no one knew what would come next. The galaxy's empires were vast and diverse, but under the shadow of humanity's battleship, they seemed fragile, disconnected from any real hope of resistance. Rumors began to spread of entire planets that had ceased communication, some of them once proud and flourishing, now eerily quiet. Had humanity destroyed them, or had they simply complied? No one knew for sure. What was clear was that the very fabric of galactic order was crumbling, and no one had any answers. There were whispers among the more desperate factions, those who had never known the power or wealth of the great empires. Some began to question whether humanity's true objective was not just to break the galactic order, but to impose a new one built on fear, on control, and on something far more profound than mere conquest. Humanity's battleship was not a force of tyranny, not yet, but it was something else. It was a symbol, a representation of absolute authority, a presence that overshadowed every other faction. In this new order, alliances became meaningless. The great powers found themselves adrift in an unknown void. The Eldar Dominion, once proud of their ability to manipulate the very fabric of space, now found themselves retreating into their sacred citadels, unwilling to risk angering a power they couldn't fathom. The Vantari, masters of technological innovation, found their greatest achievements completely eclipsed by the might of humanity's warship. Their best minds scrambled to understand what kind of technology could create such a vessel, but it was a futile endeavor. No matter how advanced their weapons or ships, nothing could touch the human ship. Nothing could even begin to comprehend it. But perhaps the most telling development was the behavior of the Tsar Consortium. Known for their ruthlessness, the Tsar had always been able to manipulate the galaxy's various factions, pitting them against each other for their own benefit. But now their influence was slipping. The galaxy's other species were no longer concerned with the Tsar's plots or schemes. They were concerned with humanity. They were terrified of it, and the Tsar, for the first time, found themselves on the back foot. Even as the galaxy's leaders debated and negotiated behind closed doors, a creeping realization settled over them. They no longer controlled the flow of events. Humanity had taken that power from them without lifting a finger. It was a humbling thought. The Tsar, the Eldar, the Vantari, all of them had spent countless millennia building empires, expanding their territories, waging wars for dominance. Yet, against humanity's quiet, relentless power, all of that seemed meaningless. The galaxy had been forced to confront the uncomfortable truth. Their greatest strength had always been their ability to impose order. But now, a new kind of order had come, one that they could neither understand nor fight. As the days turned to months and then to years, the galaxy's great empires watched and waited. They bided their time, always fearful that the next move would come not from their own forces, but from the humans. There was no way to know what they truly wanted, and no way to predict when they might act. But what was unmistakable was the truth that had settled in every mind. The galaxy had entered a new era, one where humanity held the reins, and where everything else was either subject to its will or not allowed to exist at all. Years passed, and the galaxy slowly adapted to the quiet, oppressive rule that humanity had imposed. The once bustling diplomatic halls were now empty, their leaders in exile or hiding, while lesser factions scrambled for survival under the watchful gaze of humanity's battleship. The great empires that had once defined the galaxy's darkest hours, Zark, Eldar, Vantari, had been reduced to shadows of their former selves. Their fleets, their pride, their weapons, none of it mattered anymore. There was only one power that remained, and it was not interested in negotiation, not interested in wealth, nor in conquest. Humanity's presence was a quiet, unyielding force that cast a pall over every star system it passed. Yet, even in the face of this overwhelming power, there were whispers of resistance. There always were. In the corners of the galaxy, where the galaxy's various species could still breathe without direct oversight from humanity, there was an undercurrent of rebellion, an idea that perhaps, just perhaps, humanity's rule was not as invincible as it seemed. These whispers grew into conspiracies, and conspiracies turned into movements. They called themselves the Freeborn. They were a diverse group, made up of those who had once been part of the great empires, those who had lost everything to humanity's rise. Some were former Sark military commanders, others spies, and still others from the fringes of galactic society. The Freeborn were united by a single goal: to break free from humanity's silent reign. They moved carefully, operating in the shadows, always looking over their shoulders for signs of the humans' omnipresent watch. They learned quickly that direct confrontation was a mistake. There were no battles they could win, no fleets that could stand against humanity's warship. So, instead, they adapted. They waged a different kind of war. A war of information, of sabotage, of small but meaningful strikes They leaked data to the remaining corners of the galaxy, sharing information about humanity's movements, about the methods the humans used to enforce their control. The Freeborn knew their efforts were little more than a pinprick against an invincible Titan, but they believed that as long as the fire of resistance burned, there was hope. They didn't have the power to defeat humanity outright, but they could inspire others to remember what it was like to be free, to imagine a galaxy not ruled by fear. Over time, they gained some traction. Small rebellions began to crop up, scattered and fragmented, but they were enough to give the Freeborn hope. And then, after years of careful planning, something unexpected happened. Humanity's battleship, which had always loomed over the galaxy like a silent, unfeeling god, made a move that no one had predicted. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't a declaration of war. Instead, the ship made its way toward the galactic core, to the very heart of the former empires, where the greatest leaders had once gathered. The Freeborn, thinking this was just another show of force, watched with trepidation, wondering how their already weakened world would be reshaped in the wake of this move. But then, the unimaginable occurred. Humanity's battleship stopped. The massive ship, its weapons dormant and its engines silent, simply hovered in the heart of the galaxy, no longer advancing, no longer threatening. It was a statement, clear and unmistakable. The Freeborn, the Tark, the Aeldar, and the Vantari, who had long lived in the shadow of humanity's power, found themselves staring at a new reality. Humanity was not here to destroy the galaxy. They were here to reshape it, slowly, methodically, without firing a single shot. The Freeborn, who had fought in the shadows for so long, now found themselves in a strange position. They had expected a battle for survival, but humanity's actions suggested something far more complex, something far more terrifying. The humans weren't merely seeking dominance. They were rewriting the rules of existence itself. The galaxy no longer existed in terms of conquerors and conquered. It existed in terms of compliance, of conquered. It existed in terms of compliance, of coexistence under a new and rigid order. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy's remaining powers began to come to terms with their new reality. Some surrendered completely, laying down their arms and accepting humanity's quiet rule. Others tried to resist, but they found their efforts were in vain. Humanity had no need for traditional warfare. They had simply won by being. The great empires had been destroyed not by battles, but by the gradual erosion of their will to fight. They had learned the hard way that resistance was not an option. In the end, what was left was not the bitter bitterness of conquest, but a world where everything, from the smallest colony to the grandest empire, simply humanity's rule was not cruel, it was not harsh, it was cold, impersonal, and unyielding. It was the quiet power of inevitability. The galaxy had learned, at last, the true meaning of fear, not through violence, but through a presence that could not be ignored. Humanity had not come to dominate. They had come to show that there was nothing more powerful than a force that needed nothing but compliance. And so, the galaxy learned to live in the shadow of humanity's battleship, knowing that its power was absolute. Resistance had ceased to be a dream. It had become a forgotten idea, a relic of a time when empires believed they could shape the stars. Now, those stars were humanity's to command.